He looked me dead in the eye and said, "I just don't think you're smart enough for the kind of life I want." That was the moment everything changed. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just left. And for the next 3 years, I built something so powerful, he'd end up accidentally trying to hire me. I used to think intelligence was something you either had or didn't. My ex made sure I believed I didn't. When we first met, Alex had a confidence that made people lean in. He was sharp, articulate, always reading something obscure. He quoted philosophers over coffee, corrected my pronunciation mid sentence, and smiled in a way that made me feel like maybe I was lucky just to be near him. At first, I laughed off his little comments. "Oh, that's cute," he said once when I couldn't name all the Supreme Court justices. "You wouldn't really get that book," when I asked about something on his shelf. "You're more emotionally intelligent," he'd say, as if that were a polite consolation prize. My name is Anna. I was 28 at the time, working front desk at a midtown architecture firm, dreaming about saving enough to go back to school someday. I didn't grow up in the same kind of world he did. My family valued warmth over books. My mom worked 2 jobs. I got into college, but I had to drop out when my dad got sick. I worked retail, waited tables, whatever paid rent. I loved stories, helped my little brother with homework, and could stretch a paycheck like origami. But in Alex's world, that wasn't impressive. 6 months in, we were at a dinner with his colleagues, tech consultants, all of them. I stayed quiet, listening, nodding when I could. Later, in the car, I asked him about something one of them had said about machine learning. He stared at me for a second. "Babe," he said, "you wouldn't get it." He said it kindly, like he was doing me a favor. I didn't say anything back, just looked out the window as the city lights passed. But the final moment came on a Sunday. We were folding laundry. I don't even remember what led to it. Something about a news article I'd shared. He rolled his eyes. "You know what's crazy?" he said, folding one of his expensive button-downs. "You're actually a really sweet person, but sometimes I wonder what your IQ is. Honestly, it has to be under 90. He smiled like he thought it was funny. I didn't cry. I didn't even speak. I finished folding the laundry, stacked his clothes neatly, and placed them on the couch. Then I packed a bag and left. When I walked out of Alex's apartment, I didn't have a plan, just a duffel bag and a gut-deep ache I couldn't quite name yet. I stayed with my cousin for a few days, curled up on her couch, pretending to sleep while my mind ran loops I couldn't shut off. I kept hearing that sentence. "Your IQ must be under 90. Said with that casual cruelty that doesn't bruise the skin, only the soul. The thing about emotional erosion is that it doesn't happen in a landslide. It's drip by drip. By the time you realize how far you've sunk, it's already flooded. I started remembering other moments, like when I'd tell him a story from work and he'd nod absently, then launch into a 10-minute monologue about his own meetings. Or how he once said, "I love that you're not competitive, it's refreshing," right after I'd told him I was thinking of applying to a management program. That line echoed now in a new way. He didn't love that I wasn't competitive. He loved that I didn't challenge him. One night, 2 weeks after the breakup, I sat in my cousin's tiny kitchen and stared at a spoon. Just stared. My chest felt heavy. I'd been Googling things like how to sound smarter in conversation and how to improve IQ. The next morning, I went for a walk. No phone, no distractions, just the sound of traffic and pigeons and a low, persistent throb in my ribcage. That's when I started to name it, not just the breakup, but the betrayal. Alex hadn't just left me. He'd diminished me, slowly, systematically, and I had helped. I had laughed at his jokes, downplayed my ideas, hid the parts of me that weren't polished enough for his dinner parties. And here's the thing, I'm not dumb, never was. I read 3 books a month growing up. I wrote stories, solved puzzles, fixed the washing machine when I was 12. I just didn't sound like his version of smart. But for a while, I believed him. That was the hardest part. The betrayal wasn't just his, it was mine, too. I betrayed myself by shrinking, editing, contorting into something quieter, palatable. And I was done. Not angry yet. Just clear. Clear that I didn't want to go back. Clear that I wouldn't chase his world. Clear that I would build my own. Clarity is quieter than people think. It didn't come with fireworks, just a slow, almost sacred calm. I started waking up early, not for work, not for anyone else, but for me. I'd make coffee, sit by the window, and read. At first, it was anything I could find: memoirs, articles, PDFs on cognitive psychology. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just wanted to feel full again. That's when the decision formed. Not as a flash, but a whisper. Maybe I didn't need to prove I was smart. Maybe I just needed to stop hiding how much I cared about learning. A memory surfaced, me at 14, building a homemade bookshelf out of milk crates and duct tape. I used to line it with library books, organizing them by theme. I'd forgotten that girl, but she hadn't left. She was just waiting, so I gave her space to return. I signed up for a few free online courses. One was on branding and digital identity. Another was on creative writing. I found myself scribbling notes on napkins, highlighting obsessively, talking to myself like a madwoman in my cousin's hallway. There were doubts, plenty. What was I doing at 28 starting over? Who was I trying to be? Would I ever earn enough? Would this be just another unfinished thing? The questions didn't stop. I just stopped obeying them. Every time Alex's voice crept into my head, "You wouldn't get it," I responded with action. A course finished. A small freelance gig accepted. A piece submitted to a local magazine. A networking call scheduled, even though my hands shook the entire time. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not my cousin, not my friends, especially not Alex. This wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about remembering who I was before I tried to be what he wanted. The transformation was slow, almost surgical. No grand reveals, no social media declarations, just quiet work behind the curtain. I moved into a small studio across town, peeling paint, secondhand desk, the kind of place that forced you to get creative. I pinned a corkboard above my workspace with handwritten reminders: stay curious, speak clearly, you don't need permission. By day, I still answered phones at the architecture firm, but at night, I built something else. I took on freelance branding projects. First small businesses, then personal coaches, then startups. I created logos, built websites, wrote bios that told stories. My stories. Some clients asked where I'd studied. I'd just say, life gave me a syllabus. Most didn't ask again. I started using my full name in every email: Lena Sandler. I wanted it to be a name that meant something. My rates increased. My client list grew. I began to understand strategy, not just creativity. I watched business courses, read case studies, listened to founders speak about building from nothing. I absorbed it all. The irony wasn't lost on me. Alex had said I'd never understand his world, but I wasn't trying to enter his world anymore. I was designing my own. In year 2, I registered an LLC, Sandler Studio. I hired one assistant, then 2. We specialized in narrative branding, helping overlooked founders, especially women, articulate their purpose. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was reinvention, me reclaiming the parts of myself that were always there. But deep down, I knew he'd find out, and I wanted to be ready. I invested in a personal website, carefully designed with soft colors and bold language. My story was on the homepage, not sanitized, but not bitter either. I wrote, "I used to believe I wasn't smart enough. Now I believe intelligence isn't just knowing the answer, it's asking the better question." By the time I was invited to speak at a Women in Business conference, I had nearly 200 clients served, a portfolio that spoke for itself, and a name that was starting to mean something. 3 years had passed since I'd last seen Alex. Until the day I did. It was at the conference after party on a rooftop in Soho. I was holding a glass of sparkling water, speaking to a tech founder about scalable brand systems, when I heard that voice behind me. "Lena?" I turned. It took a second, but there he was. Same expensive blazer, same self-assured grin that had once disarmed me. Except this time, it didn't. He blinked. Wow, you look different. I smiled. So do you, or maybe I just see clearer now. He chuckled awkwardly. I heard about your studio. You've built something impressive. There was a flicker in his eyes. Recognition. Then, was it regret? I always knew you were creative, he said, like it was a compliment he had the right to give. I nodded. Turns out creativity is a kind of intelligence, too. He paused, hands in pockets, eyes scanning the crowd. Maybe we could catch up sometime? I looked past him, toward my assistant waiting with a folder. I don't think that's necessary. Not unkind, just final. And with that, I walked away. The rooftop encounter didn't haunt me. It confirmed something. For so long, I had carried his words like a weight. You're not smart enough. But seeing him that night, hearing his voice without feeling small, it was like shedding an old skin. He wasn't a villain anymore, just a man whose version of intelligence was narrow, rigid, self-congratulatory, and I had outgrown all of it. The following month, I was invited to speak at a TEDx event in Brooklyn. The topic, Redefining Intelligence in the Age of Story. I stood under the lights, nerves buzzing, then opened with a simple line. I was once told my IQ was probably under 90. Tonight, I'm not here to prove otherwise. I'm here to ask, why do we measure intelligence in such narrow ways? I shared my story, not as revenge, but as reflection. The audience was silent, then emotional. A few women came up afterward, teary-eyed, telling me they'd been told similar things, that they'd hidden their curiosity, that they'd believed they weren't enough. That night wasn't about Alex. It was about all of us who had ever been made to feel small. After the video went online, my inbox flooded. Invitations, clients, young girls asking for advice, older women saying, "You said what I wish I'd heard at 25. And somewhere in that flurry, I received a message I didn't expect. It was from Alex's company. They were launching a new product, some AI-powered storytelling engine, and wanted brand consultation. It wasn't from Alex directly, but his name was in the 2 C's. I stared at it for a long time. Then, without bitterness or pleasure, I hit delete. That was the twist. I didn't need to reply. I didn't need to win. I already had. It's strange what you remember. 3 years after I walked out of Alex's apartment, I found myself building a new bookshelf in my home office. Real wood this time. Smooth edges. I stained it by hand, slow and deliberate. There was one empty slot on the top shelf. I left it open, almost symbolically, for the book I hadn't written yet. The one about story, voice, power. The one I knew I would write, not to prove anything, but because it needed to exist. Sandler Studio had grown beyond me. We were now a team of 6. Our clients ranged from immigrant-owned bakeries to Silicon Valley founders who actually listened. We didn't just design brands, we helped people reclaim their voice. Sometimes I thought about that girl who'd once Googled how to sound smart. I wished I could reach back and whisper to her, "You don't need to sound smart, you already are." I don't hate Alex. I don't love him either. He was a moment in my life, a mirror, a spark, an architect of pain that became the blueprint for my clarity. The revenge, if you could even call it that, was never about him. It was about becoming undeniable in my own quiet, persistent way. These days, I speak differently. I take longer pauses, I ask better questions. I don't downplay the parts of me that feel too big, too intense, too much. And every time I finish a client project or get a kind email from a young designer saying, "You made me believe I could," I look at that empty slot on the shelf. It's still waiting, but not for long. If you've ever been told you weren't smart enough, not strategic enough, not built for someone else's world, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below and tell me, what was the moment you decided to stop shrinking and start building? And if you're still in that quiet phase, figuring it out, trying, failing, starting again, I see you. You don't have to announce your reinvention, just live it. And when you're ready, we'll be here.